for coming. And Dorothea, thank you so much for having me. It's just lovely to be back in Princeton. Just walking to the bookstore this evening, I thought I should come back and teach for a year or something. So I don't know if creative writing people are here, but please ask me. So it's nice to be back. I lived here for a year, and I don't think my account or my experience of Princeton was as devastating as JP class seems to have been. But not to say, I liked Princeton, but I liked it particularly because I knew I would not be staying. So Americanah is a novel about, about a number of things. But really, the major frame is it's a traditional love story. It's about Ifemelo and Obinze. Ifemelo is a young woman, she meets Obinze in secondary school in Nigeria, and then they part. She goes to the US, he goes to the UK, and then many years later, she moves back to Nigeria. So I think I'll read a short section I'll read from the beginning, and maybe a little bit from the end, and then we can have a conversation. How much should I read for? I think about when I attend readings, I start to fall asleep at about 20 minutes. I think I'll stop at 20 minutes. Okay. So I'll read from the beginning. Princeton in the summer smelled of nothing. And although Ifemelo liked the tranquil greenness of the many trees, the clean streets, and the stately homes, the delicately overpriced shops, and the quiet, abiding air of earned grace, it was this, the lack of a smell, that most appealed to her. Perhaps because the other American cities she knew well had all smelled distinctly. Philadelphia had the musty scent of history. New Haven smelled of neglect. Baltimore smelled of brine. And Brooklyn of sun-warmed garbage. It's well meant. But Princeton had no smell. She liked taking deep breaths here. She liked watching the locals who drove with pointed courtesy and parked their latest model cars outside the organic grocery store on Nassau Street, or outside the sushi restaurants, or outside the ice cream shop that had 50 different flavors, including red pepper, or outside the post office where effusive staff bounded out to greet them at the entrance. She liked the campus, grave with knowledge, the Gothic buildings with their vine-laced walls, and the way everything transformed in the half-light of night into a ghostly scene. She liked most of all that in this place of affluent ease, she could pretend to be someone else, someone specially admitted into a hallowed American club, someone adorned with certainty. But she did not like that she had to go to Trenton to braid her hair. It was unreasonable to expect a braiding salon in Princeton. The few black locals she had seen were so light-skinned and lank-haired she could not imagine them wearing braids. And yet, as she waited at Princeton Junction Station for the train on an afternoon ablaze with heat, she wondered why there was no place where she could braid her hair. The chocolate bar in her handbag had melted. A few other people were waiting on the platform, all of them white and lean, in short, flimsy clothes. The man standing closest to her was eating an ice cream cone. She had always found it a little irresponsible, the eating of ice cream cones by grown-up American men. Especially the eating of ice cream cones by grown-up American men in public. He turned to her and said, "About time," when the train finally creaked in, with the familiarity that strangers adopt with each other after sharing in the disappointment of a public service. She smiled at him. The graying hair on the back of his head was swept forward, a comical arrangement to disguise his bald spot. He had to be an academic, but not in the humanities, or he would be more self-conscious. A firm science like chemistry, maybe. Before, she would have said, "I know," that peculiar American expression that professed agreement rather than knowledge. And then she would have started a conversation with him to see if he would say something she could use in her blog. People were flattered to be asked about themselves, and if she said nothing after they spoke, it made them say more. They were conditioned to feel silences. If they asked what she did, she would say vaguely, "I write a lifestyle blog." Because saying, "I write an anonymous blog called Race Teens, or various observations about American blacks, those formerly known as Negroes, by a non-American black," would make them uncomfortable. She had said it, though, a few times. Once, to a dreadlocked white man who sat next to her on the train, his hair like old twine ropes that ended in a blonde fuzz. His tattered shirt worn with enough piety to convince her that he was a social warrior and might make a good guest blogger. Race is totally overhyped these days. Black people need to get over themselves. It's all about class now, the haves and the have-nots, he told her evenly. And she used it as the opening sentence of a post titled, "Not all dreadlocked white American guys are down." Then there was the man from Ohio, who was squeezed next to her in a flight, a middle manager, she was sure, from his boxy suit and contrast collar. He wanted to know what she meant by lifestyle blog, and she told him, expecting him to become reserved or to end the conversation by saying something defensively bland like, "The only race that matters is the human race." But he said, "Ever write about adoption? Nobody wants black babies in this country, and I don't mean biracial, I mean black. Even the black families don't want them." He told her that he and his wife had adopted a black child, and their neighbors looked at them as though they had chosen to become martyrs for a dubious cause. Her blog post about him, titled, "Badly dressed white middle managers from Ohio are not always what you think," had received the highest number of comments for that month. She still wondered if he had read it. She hoped so. Often she would sit in cafes or airports or train stations watching strangers, imagining their lives and wondering which of them were likely to have read her blog, now her ex-blog. She had written the final post only days ago, trailed by 274 comments so far. All those readers growing month by month, linking and cross-posting, knowing so much more than she did. They had always frightened and exhilarated her. Safik the reader, one of the most frequent posters, wrote, "I'm a bit surprised by how personally I'm taking this. Good luck as you pursue the unnamed life change. But please come back to blogging soon. You've used your irreverent, hectoring, funny, and thought-provoking voice to create a space for real conversations about an important subject." Readers like Safik the reader, who reeled off statistics and used words like verify in their comments, made Ifemele nervous, eager to be fresh and to impress, so that she began over time to feel like a vulture hacking into the carcasses of people's stories for something she could use, sometimes making fragile links to race, sometimes not believing herself. The more she wrote, the less sure she became. Each post scraped off one more scale of self until she felt naked and false. The ice cream eating man sat beside her on the train, and to discourage conversation, she stared at a brown stain near her feet, the spilled frozen frappuccino, until they arrived at Trenton. The platform was crowded with black people, many of them fat, in short, flimsy clothes. It still startled her what a difference a few minutes of train travel made. During her first year in America, when she took New Jersey Transit to Penn Station and then the subway to visit Auntie Jude in Flatlands, she was struck by how mostly slim white people got off at the stops in Manhattan. And as the train went further into Brooklyn, the people left were mostly black and fat. She had not thought of them as fat, though. She had thought of them as big. Because one of the first things her friend Ginica told her was that fat in America was a bad word, heaving with moral judgment, like stupid or bastard, and not a mere description like short or tall. So she had banished fat from her vocabulary. But fat came back to her last winter, after almost 13 years, when a man in line behind her at the supermarket muttered, "Fat people don't need to be eating that shit," as she paid for her giant bag of Tostitos. She glanced at him, surprised, mildly offended, and thought it a perfect blog post, how this stranger had decided she was fat. She would file the post under the tag, "Race gender, and body size. But back home, as she stood and faced the mirror's truth, she realized that she had ignored for too long the new tightness of her clothes, the rubbing together of her inner thigh, the softer, rounder parts of her that shook when she moved. She was fat. She said the word fat slowly, funneling it back and forward, and thought about all the other things she had learned not to say aloud in America. She was fat. She was not curvy or big-boned. She was fat. It was the only word that felt true. And she had ignored, too, the cement in her soul. Her blog was doing well, with thousands of unique visitors each month, and she was earning good speaking fees, and she had a fellowship at Princeton, and a relationship with Blaine. And yet, there was cement in her soul. It had been there for a while, an early morning disease of fatigue, bleakness, and borderlessness. It brought with it amorphous longings, shapeless desires, brief imaginary glints of other lives she could be living, that over the months melded into a piercing homesickness. She scoured Nigerian websites, Nigerian profiles on Facebook, Nigerian blogs, and each click brought yet another story of a young person who had recently moved back home to start an investment company, a music production business, a fashion label. She looked at photographs of these men and women and felt the dull ache of loss, as though they had prized open her hand and taken something of hers. They were living her life. Nigeria became where she was supposed to be, the only place she could sink her roots in without the constant urge to tug them out and shake off the soil. And of course, there was also Obinze, her first love, her first lover, the only person with whom she had never felt the need to explain herself. He was now a husband and father, and they had not been in touch in years. Yet, she could not pretend that he was not a part of her homesickness, or that she did not often think of him sifting through their past, looking for portents of what she could not name. The rude stranger in the supermarket, who knew what problems he was wrestling with, haggard and thin-lipped as he was, had intended to offend her, but had instead prodded her awake. She began to plan and to dream, to apply for jobs in Lagos. She did not tell Blaine at first because she wanted to finish her fellowship at Princeton. And then, after her fellowship ended, she did not tell him because she wanted to give herself time to be sure. But as the weeks passed, she knew she would never be sure. So she told him that she was moving back home, and she added, "I have to," knowing he would hear in her words the sound of an ending. "Why?" Blaine asked, almost automatically, stunned by her announcement. There they were in his living room in New Haven, awash in soft jazz and daylight, and she looked at him, her good, bewildered man, and she felt the day take on a sad, epic quality. They had lived together for 3 years free of crease, like a smoothly ironed sheet, until their only fight months ago, when Blaine's eyes froze with blame, and he refused to speak to her. But they had survived that fight, mostly because of Barack Obama, bonding anew over their shared passion. On election night, before Blaine kissed her, his face wet with tears, he held her tightly, as though Obama's victory was also their personal victory. And now here she was telling him it was over. Why? He asked. He taught ideas of nuance and complexity in his classes, and yet he was asking her for a single reason, the cause. But she had not had a bold epiphany, and there was no cause. It was simply that layer after layer of discontent had settled in her and formed a mass that now propelled her. She did not tell him this because it would hurt him to know she had felt that way for a while, that her relationship with him was like being content in a house but always sitting by the window and looking out. "Take the plant," he said to her on the last day she saw him, when she was packing the clothes she kept in his apartment. He looked defeated, standing slump-shouldered in the kitchen. It was his houseplant, hopeful green leaves rising from 3 bamboo stems, and when she took it, A sudden, crushing loneliness lanced through her and stayed with her for weeks. Sometimes she still felt it. How was it possible to miss something you no longer wanted? I'll leave you to ponder that question. I'll read another short excerpt from toward the middle of the book. And yes. So actually, so I'll read a very short excerpt from the middle of the book, and this is where Ifemele meets Lane, who is the partner that we hear about in the beginning of the novel. It's very hard. Okay, she meets him on a train, Amtrak, and she sits next to him. "How are you?" he asked. She had learned to say, "Good, how are you?" in that sing-song American way. But now she said, "I'm well, thank you." "My name is Blaine," he said, and extended his hand. He looked tall, a man with skin the color of gingerbread and the kind of lean, proportioned body that was perfect for a uniform, any uniform. She knew right away that he was African American, not Caribbean, not African, not a child of immigrants from either place. She had not always been able to tell. Once, when she had asked a taxi driver, "So where are you from?" in a knowing, familiar tone, certain that he was from Ghana, and he said, "Detroit," with a shrug. But the longer she spent in America, the better she had become at distinguishing, sometimes from looks and gait, but mostly from bearing and demeanor, that fine-grained mark that culture stamps on people. She felt confident about Blaine. He was a descendant of the black men and women who had been in America for hundreds of years. "I'm Ifemele," she said. "It's nice to meet you." "Are you Nigerian?" "I am, yes." "Bushi Nigerian," he said and smiled. There was a surprising and immediate intimacy to his teasing her, calling her privileged. "Well, just as bougie as you," she said. They were on firm, flirting territory now. She looked him over quietly, his light-colored khakis and navy shirt, the kind of outfit that was selected with the right amount of thought, a man who looked at himself in the mirror but did not look for too long. He knew about Nigerians, he told her. He was an assistant professor at Yale, and although his interest was mostly in Southern Africa, how could he not know about Nigerians when they were everywhere? "What is it, 1 in every 5 Africans is Nigerian?" he asked, still smiling. There was something both ironic and gentle about him. It was as if he believed that they shared a series of intrinsic jokes that did not need to be verbalized. "Yes, we Nigerians get around, we have to. There are too many of us and not enough space," she said. And it struck her how close to each other they were, separated only by the single armrest. "So, is Southern Africa your discipline?" she asked. "No, comparative politics. You can't do just Africa in political science programs in this country. You can compare Africa to Poland or Israel, but focusing on Africa itself, they don't let you do that." His use of "they" suggested an "us," which would be the both of them. His nails were clean. He was not wearing a wedding band. She began to imagine a relationship, both of them waking up in the winter, cuddling in the stark whiteness of the morning light, drinking English breakfast tea. She hoped he was one of those Americans who liked tea. His juice, the bottle stuffed in the pouch in front of him, was organic pomegranate. A plain brown bottle with a plain brown label, both stylish and salutary. No chemicals in the juice and no ink wasted on decorative labels. Where had he bought it? It was not the sort of thing that was sold at the train station. Perhaps he was vegan and distrusted large corporations and shopped only at farmers' markets and brought his own organic juice from home. She had little patience for Ginika's friends, most of whom were like that. Their righteousness made her feel both irritated and lacking. But she was prepared to forgive Blaine's parities. He was holding a hardcover library book whose title she could not see, and had stuffed his New York Times next to the juice bottle. When he glanced at her magazine, she wished she had brought out the book of poems that she planned to read on the train. He would think that she read only shallow fashion magazines. She felt the sudden and unreasonable urge to tell him how much she loved the poetry of Yusuf Komuniakan to redeem herself. First, she shielded with her palm the bright red lipstick on the cover model's face. Then, she reached forward and pushed the magazine into the pouch in front of her and said with a slight sniff that it was absurd how women's magazines forced images of small-boned, small-breasted white women on the rest of the multi-boned, multi-ethnic world of women to emulate. But I keep reading them, she said. It's like smoking. It's bad for you, but you do it anyway. Multi-boned and multi-ethnic, he said, amused, his eyes warm with unabashed interest. It charmed her that he was not the kind of man who, when he was interested in a woman, cultivated a certain cool, pretended indifference. I think I might stop here. Then she goes on to make fun of academics, and I don't think this is a good place. So finally, I'll read a short excerpt from toward the end of the book. Ifemelu, and this is when Ifemelu doesn't move back. And she's just moved back to Lagos. At first, Lagos assaulted her. The sun-dazed haste, the yellow buses full of squashed limbs, the sweating hawkers racing after cars, the advertisements on hulking billboards, and the heaps of rubbish that rose on the roadsides like a taunt. Commerce thronged too defiantly, and the air was dense with exaggeration, conversations full of over-protestations. One morning, a man's body lay on a Wollowo road. Another morning, the island flooded and cars became gasping boats. Here, she felt, anything could happen. A ripe tomato could burst out of solid stone. And so she had the dizzying sensation of falling into the new person she had become, falling into the strange familiar. Had it always been like this, or had it changed so much in her absence? When she left home, only the wealthy had mobile phones. All the numbers started with '90, and the girls wanted to date '90 men. Now, her hair braider had a mobile phone. The plantain seller tending the blackened grill had a mobile phone. She had grown up knowing all the bus stops and the side streets, understanding the cryptic codes of conductors and the body language of street hawkers. Now, she struggled to grasp the unspoken. When had shopkeepers become so rude? Had buildings in Lagos always had this patina of decay? And when did Lagos become a city of people quick to beg and too enamored of free things? Americanah, her friend Rani Nudo teased her often. You're looking at things with American eyes, but the problem is that you're not even a real Americana. At least if you had an American accent, we would tolerate your complaining. Rani Nudo picked her up from the airport, standing by the arrival's exit in a billowy bridesmaid's dress, her blusher too red on her cheeks, like bruises. The green satin flowers in her hair now askew. Ifemelu was struck by how arresting, how attractive Rani Nudo was. No longer a ropey mass of gangly arms and gangly legs, but now a big, firm, curvy woman, exulting in her weight and height, and it made her imposing, a presence that drew the eyes. Rani, Ifemelu said, I know my coming back is a big deal, but I didn't know it was big enough for you to wear a ball gown. Idiot, Rani Nudo said. I came straight from the wedding. I didn't want to risk the traffic of going back home to change. They hugged, holding each other close. Rani Nudo smelled of a floral perfume and exhaust fumes and sweat. She smelled of Nigeria. You look amazing, Ifemelu said. I mean, underneath all that war paint. Ranyudo laughed. Her looks had changed, but the excitable, slightly reckless air about her had not. Unchanged too was the eternal gurgle in her voice, laughter just beneath the surface. She drove fast, braking sharply and glancing often at the BlackBerry on her lap. Whenever the traffic stilled, she picked it up and typed swiftly. Rani, you should text and drive only when you are alone so that you kill only yourself, Ifemelu said. Haba, Rani said. I don't text and drive, though. I text when I'm not driving. Now this wedding was something else, the best wedding I've been to. I wonder if you remember the bride. She was Funke's very good friend in secondary school. If you see her now, she's a serious babe. Her husband has major money. Her engagement ring is bigger than Zuma Rock. Ifemelu stared out of the window, half listening, thinking how unpretty Lagos was. Roads infested with potholes, houses springing up unplanned like weeds. Of her jumble of feelings, she recognized only confusion. Lime and peach, Rainudo said. What? The wedding colors, lime and peach. The whole decoration was so nice and the cake was just beautiful. Look, I took some pictures. I'm going to put this one up on Facebook. Rainudo gave Ifemelu her BlackBerry. Ifemelu held onto it so that Rainudo would focus on her driving. Oh, and I met someone, Rainudo said. He saw me when I was waiting outside for the mass to end. It was so hot, my foundation was melting on my face and I know I looked like a zombie, but he still came to talk to me. That's a good sign. I think this one is serious husband material. Did I tell you my mother was saying novenas to end my relationship when I was dating Ibrahim? At least she will not have a heart attack with this one. His name is Ntuti. You can't get more Igbo than that. And you should have seen his watch. He's into oil. Why were you waiting outside during Mass? Ifemelu asked. Oh, all the bridesmaids had to wait outside because our dresses were indecent. Rainudo rolled the word indecent around her tongue and chuckled. It happens all the time, especially in Catholic churches. We even had cover-ups, but the priest said they were too lazy. So we just waited outside until the Mass ended. But thank God for that, or I would not have met this guy. Ifemelu looked at Rainudo's dress, its thin straps, its pleated neckline that showed no cleavage. Before she left Nigeria, were bridesmaids banished from church services because their dresses had spaghetti straps? She did not think so, but she was no longer sure. She was no longer sure what was new in Lagos and what was new in herself. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Would you take a few questions? So if you want to raise your hand and then either you can get up and just speak up or I'll come around with the mic. Right here.
Thank you very much for a very wonderful talk. I'm a good fan of you and I have 2 points, one bad and one good. I'll start with a good one. Having read your works, I adopted you. I adopted you as my daughter. It was a big fight with my other daughters, but finally when I gave them your works, they agreed that you deserve to be my daughter. The second one is to do with hair. Your preoccupation with hair. I'm tempted to think that maybe you are a reflection of what Bitex Song of Lawino. I don't know, I could be right or wrong. But I'm a professor of literature from the University of Dar es Salaam and I've taught Song of Lawino for a very long time. Somehow it seems to have had no effect. Because my students seem to be laughing at me when I talk about hair, Lawino talks about some hair that has been fried, you know, fried hair, African hair and skin and stuff like that. And I've started wondering about the effect of literature. How effective is literature? How, if for as long as Lawino was written, how many years ago? But it doesn't seem to have worked. So how do you hope your work will work?
I don't know, really. Here's what I hope will happen. I hope people will read Americanah and then everybody will just go off and become obsessed with natural black hair, and white women will then put chemicals in their hair to give them an afro. Everybody will sort of walk around with big afros. That's what I hope will happen. That's really the plan. That's why I wrote this book.
Who would like to follow that?
I was just curious, depending on the amount of time you actually spend in the U.S. Compared to Nigeria, what is it like for you going back home? Because personally, I'm also from Nigeria, and when I go back home, I always feel things are actually getting worse compared to getting better. So I'm just wondering, from your own point of view, what is it like for you going back home? Depending on the amount of time you spend.
I spend almost an equal amount of time in Nigeria as I do in the US these days. So I think the condition of just feeling like everything is falling apart is a particular condition of the foreign dweller. So it's very easy to be, really, because I think when I first left Nigeria, I didn't go back for 4 years, really, because I couldn't afford to. And then the first time I went back, I thought, oh my Lord, everything is terrible. And really, it's because I think, in a sense, that my eyes had been conditioned by America. And so I wasn't looking at Nigeria on its own terms, so I thought, oh my Lord, it's terrible. I don't anymore, and I think it's because, it's because Nigeria has become home again. I have a home in Lagos, I spend a lot of time there, and I find that I just very easily slip into my Nigerian self when I'm there. So I don't, actually, I complain the most when I'm in Nigeria, but I do think that there are things to be pleased about and things to be unhappy about. I mean, lately I've sort of, and just a little sort of small story. A friend of mine who's English came to visit Lagos, and he said that driving from the airport, and it was his first time in Nigeria, and he said, the first thing I thought was, it's so dark. And when he said that, I thought, what do you mean? It was at night? Of course it was dark. And then he said, no, I haven't, he said, you just don't have a lot of street lights, which we don't. But what struck me about it was that I hadn't noticed that the minute I land in at the airport in Lagos, I become my Nigerian self. So I don't even really expect to see the street lights. But if I landed at the airport in DC, for example, and I didn't see the lights, I would think, oh my Lord, something is wrong. And it was very interesting for me because I then thought it's quite, I thought this is how, sometimes it takes an outsider to see things about your own space that you don't always see well. And also it made me realize that I really do become a different version of myself when I'm home. A version of myself that is understanding of Nigeria and takes Nigeria on its own terms, so that I can measure success or failure on Nigerians' terms rather than,
Actually, I don't. That's all right. Actually, on that last note, I wanted to thank you. I don't know anybody who can see, who can be their West African self and be their West African in America and occupy those in-between spaces. Every time I read you, I know I've got a sister walking beside me. I tell everybody, you want to understand what it's like to be a late 20th century diasporic person, read Chimamanda, especially the thing around your neck. I thank you so much.
Thank you. That means a lot to me.
I have a similar comment as Dr. Adina. I think your occupation of both spaces is similar to what I've had to do. And like you said, if you live outside of Nigeria, Nigeria looks like a wreck. But when you go back, after a couple of weeks, you become a Nigerian. You don't expect to see electricity everywhere. You don't expect to see cleanliness. And the fact that Princeton has no smell. Everybody I know who goes to Nigeria, once you get off the plane, the smell hits you, and you know you're in Nigeria. So I appreciate that observation. It's not bad, but it's a different smell.
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you. I just want to commend you again and basically reiterate what my sisters have said. Thank you so much for the work that you do, for what you bring to light in our cultures as Nigerians, and it translates as well as Africans, right? A year ago, just like the lady in the story, when I moved to Princeton and lived on Palmer Square, I thought to myself, why did I ever come here? Like, what made me take this job? Interestingly, I moved here for work, and interestingly, I would take a taxi and say I'm going home, and they would drop me across the street and say, this is Palmer Square. I'm like, no, I'm going home, and I want you to drop me in front of my door. And he's like, oh, because he didn't expect me to live in Palmer Square for some reason, right? So I just want to say thank you for the interesting things that you write and that the way you put it together, the humor and all of it, it's very, very good. And again, I love the smell of Nigeria. Like, I can't really count in my days until I can move back to some country in Africa. I don't know where, but it's another year, and then I'm like, ooh, I can't wait. But having the advantage of, as well to have a U.S. education, to live here, it's something that I appreciate, and it's always something that I'm glad that I had a chance to do. But thank you so much for what you do, and we're very proud of you.
Thank you. Are you Nigerian?
I don't. Well, I'm not Nigerian. I'm from Mississippi, so I want to ask, thank you for your work. I'm a serious fan of your work, and I want to kind of ask a question around two parts, or two dimensions of your work as I see it. One is the grappling with religious commitments. Religious commitments. One has to do with religious commitments. I've already started Americanah, and I see the mother of the central character grappling, her evolution, and the way in which you manage it. So I would love for you to talk about that a bit. And then the kind of consistency across the books of characters like Auntie, the Americans say Uju, right, Oju, right, Auntie Uju, right? And I see elements of her character in the other books as well. And especially a kind of, not evolution, but devolution, how she evolves from strong to accommodating, or however we want to describe it. So if you could talk about, I don't want to say a character type in your work, but the subject of religion and how this particular kind of figure emerges in your work.
I think the second part is simply that I just keep writing about the same damn person, really. I'm just very limited in my...
I don't buy that.
I hadn't actually thought about that, but I suppose in some ways, as you drew in Americanah and Cambilli's Aunt in Purple Hibiscus, maybe I think it's less about sort of the same character, and something more about that in my life, but also the imaginative space that I occupy, there's always the female relative who's important in the character's life, not the mother. There's always sort of, and I think maybe that's because for me, I don't know, maybe I might have to do psychotherapy on myself. Maybe it's sort of my, I don't know, inherent gender I don't know, identity and I don't know what it is really, but I don't know that I can actually talk about that, yeah, I don't know. But the first part, religion, it's not surprising to me that you would notice the religion. Can I just say a little thing? So when I was writing Blaine, I remember that you had told me about being from Mississippi and being Catholic, right? And I actually wanted to make Blaine, I thought maybe I should make Blaine a Catholic from Mississippi. I didn't do it, it's not there. But just I thought I would mention that. So maybe the next novel, but do you see? Religion interests me. Religion really interests me, and I think partly because I grew up in a family that's very Catholic, and as a child I was very interested, just deeply. I was the child who, when I was 14, I was reading histories of popes and the Catholic Church. I was just deeply interested, and also I was a self-styled apologist for the Catholic Church. We in primary school would have these fights, and I think Nigerians here probably recognize this, the Catholic versus Anglican, or really Catholic versus non-Catholic. So the non-Catholics would go, you Catholics worship Mary, and then we, the Catholics, would say, no, you don't have the tradition. And I was always the leader of the Catholic side. Because, and then if I didn't really know what I was talking about, I had a way of sounding like I did. And so my friends would want me to speak for the Catholic side. But I think really that what it says, so sometimes I would just reel off things and be like, but in the Bible it says that the Pope is really the head of the church. And because these other poor kids weren't quite sure that the Bible said this or not, they had to say. So I did very well at defending the Catholic Church in my teenage years. But really, just in a larger sense, I was deeply interested in religion. I was drawn to the drama and the theatrics of Catholicism. I think as I got older, I started to question more, but the pool of religion, I think, still remains for me. But the other thing, of course, is that religion is such a strong force in Nigeria. I think it's impossible to engage with Nigeria honestly without engaging with Christianity in its various forms. And in Americanah, Ifemelu's mother, I mean, there's a kind of sort of, it's supposed to be funny in a way, but also it's the truth about how people hop from church to church, about the growing prosperity Christianity, about the way that, the explanation for everything is somehow God. Right? So we're also supposed to sit back, and people steal money and they say we thank God. The plane crashes and we say we have to pray. And really, I was thinking about it, you can't run for public office in Nigeria today without invoking God, without God being the center of what you're doing. You have to call on God all the time. And I find that very interesting. And also the way that people bend over backwards to defend pastors and their excessive spending or excessive sort of accumulation of wealth. And people defend this, and at the same time, it's okay to have poverty sitting side by side. So it's a very interesting thing for me, and I think for Nigeria as well, I think it's really shaped the way that our politics works. I think it's shaped the way that really, it's almost a form of social control. That there are many things you can't say, because you say it and people say, oh, no, that the devil is using you, don't say that. Just leave it to God, sort of thing. And yeah, so I suppose it's I think all of my work actually in the end will somehow be about religion. I think Nigeria is so deeply entangled in a kind of religiosity that, and I think most people who read my work will know that I find it very disturbing. That religion can be such a force for good, obviously, but that in Nigeria, the many permutations of religion just really worry me.